From the West Coast, the East Coast, and deep in the heart of Texas, it's the Geek at Arms podcast with Bryan, Mike, and James.
Greetings, everyone. Welcome to the latest episode of the Geek at Arms podcast, a podcast about three guys hanging out at the crossroads of geek culture and Christian faith. I'm James, and as always, my friends Mike and Bryan are with me. Mike, how you doing, my man?
I am doing well and happy to be alive.
Glad to hear it.
For once.
For once, because you've been... like Spock, he's been dead before. Bryan, you doing okay?
Yeah, I'm much happier doing this with you guys than being involved in my real life, so
excellent.
All cylinders go.
All right.
I'm glad I'm part of your unreal life.
That's right. Yes. We will dive deeper into this escapism with Geek Out. Who's going to kick it off this episode?
I will. So I think I mentioned a couple episodes back, maybe last episode, about a game called Pax Dei. Or maybe I didn't. I don't remember what I've talked about here or not.
You had me at PAX.
You had me at Day.
It's the best things of both of those. This is a game that just went into early access on Steam. I'd played in the alpha test, which they've skipped directly from alpha test to early access, which seems like they skipped a step in there, the beta, but whatever. It's a not really a survival, a building, crafting game. Combat seems to be kind of secondary to it. And I don't know what all the lore is about it, but there's these obelisks that every time you die, you respawn next to the obelisk. And it seems to be something that suppresses people's ability to fight with one another. So I think in most of the territory, there's no PvP. It's all just players versus environment. Every single thing in the world is either a drop from a monster or constructed by a player. There's no NPC craftsmen or shopkeepers or anything of that sort.
So no hoarding up gold and then kitting yourself out at the local shopkeeper.
Right. If there's a shopkeeper in the game, it's another player who has been trading for things or building it themselves. So I'm in the midst of building a nice round tower for myself. I've got half of one story done and trying to just find all the crafting recipes that I need to build the different pieces of it. I still have to find stone walls with windows in them.
So I'm looking at the artwork or the graphics. It looks gorgeous.
Yes, it is. For people who are kind of in the know on games tech, it's one of the first released games using the Unreal Engine 5.4, 5.3, because 5.4 is only like 2 months old. So Unreal Engine 5.3, so it's got all the latest tech available to it. It's a gigantic game. I ran for about an hour today to find some granite because I needed it for building something. And I got just like maybe 2 or 3% of the way across the map of my territory.
Oh, wow.
And there are 6 territories. So it's gigantic, and it's very, very deep in the crafting tree. And during the alpha, I was complaining that it was taking me forever just to make shoes because they were like 7 layers down in the crafting tree. Like, no, seriously, I want to be able to make shoes before I make a leather jerkin, sandals, something.
Oh, yeah, that's fair.
So they apparently took that feedback and they put shoes in at the beginning of the game, so I didn't have to run around barefoot for 12 hours.
Like, now I have the best shoes and no pants. All right. But at least now I'm prepared to run an hour to get pants.
Yeah. How come no one noticed he had pants? Did you miss it? He has great shoes.
Well, that was the thing. The first time I played it, during the alpha, I had a full set of clothes. I had a hat. I had a cloak. I could not make shoes. Trousers, all of it. I had an iron spear, no shoes.
Well,
it was driving me crazy.
That kind of mirrors real life in a way. So I've helped create in the SCA sew a tunic. I've put together all the pieces and stained my own belts. And I made a hood and mantle and other things. Shoes, though, completely out of my wheelhouse.
No, you cannot cobble those together.
No, not at all.
Was that a pun?
No. Yes.
It really
yes,
wasn't.
absolutely it was.
It was.
Anyway, but it's been enjoyable. I don't know how much time these people are spending on it because I was like day one, within the first few hours of the game being released, I was in it. I had already had experience, so I knew how the tech tree kind of worked. And I'm getting in there and I'm making things, and people are already dropping like, here, have some chainmail. I'm like, it's been 6 hours. How did you find time to get all of your crafting recipes and get enough stuff to make chainmail already?
Because
yes,
there will
thank you. I'll take
always
that.
be people who do that.
Yeah, there is
in
that
any
guy.
game.
But I've been having fun with it. It's only been less than a week since it dropped, but we'll see if it entertains me for the long haul.
Has there been any indication if it will cross over onto console?
I do not know. I haven't really been looking at the like the developers' blogs. They're a company in like Norway, I think, something like that. I guess I have a friend who one of my coworkers visited them just a few months ago. I should ask him if he knows.
I've not really done any games like this before, but the look, the feel, it's striking all of the medieval fantasy vibes just right in me. And
yeah, it's got a kind of a Kingdom Come vibe to it.
And I would definitely be interested in trying this out on PlayStation if it comes to that.
There's currently not any plans to release it on console, but that may change.
Yeah, it's still very, very much a prototype, I think, from the way it feels and looks. I have a feeling that their early access is going to be a very, very long window before they release the full game.
Fingers crossed that it does not become an Xbox exclusive.
Or Star Citizen. Besides PAX Day, I went and I took care of the cat again in Florida. And one of the things that I like about doing that is that Yolanda and Christian pay for all of the streaming services. So they had Paramount Plus.
Ooh, so you got to see all the track.
All the Star Trek.
Everything Star Trek. I started with Lower Decks because it was easy and you guys had talked it up so much.
It's delightful.
It was so good. I liked it so much.
Mm-hmm.
And from there, I popped over. I started Strange New Worlds and then realized, oh, hey, this has got some Discovery backstory that I need. So I went back and I watched Discovery and then Strange New Worlds. I think I'm halfway through season 2 of Strange New Worlds now and loving it just as much as I did watching those first 3 episodes way back when. And so it's just been, I got back home and like, I'm on season 3 of Discovery and I just got cut off. I guess I'll start my free trial period. And that ran out and I was like 2 episodes into Strange New Worlds. It's like, okay, I'll let it continue. So now I've subscribed to Paramount Plus and I'm going to try and get through the rest of what I've got to watch before I have to pay for another month.
See, that's their entire plan of how to hook you, is Yolanda and Christian specifically.
Oh, right, yes. Somebody at CBS said, hey, we're going to give you this cat.
We're going to drop this cat at the shelter. These people are going to adopt this cat. Then their friend is going to babysit. And then the other execs are like, there's so many ways that this plan could go wrong. What makes you... What on earth kind of plan is that? And now, like, tomorrow, he's going into the board and you're like, so, are you all planning
we got
to
our
eat?
$6.
Yeah, we got our $6 out of that.
You should have really looked at the cat's actual name on its collar. When you turn over the ID, you see its actual name is Viacom.
Well, after having watched so much Star Trek, I think that probably this Byzantine labyrinthine plot is definitely a gambit in the temporal Cold War.
I have not watched any of either Enterprise or anything past the point where I fell off of Discovery, so I'm sure that that's funny, but I have no idea what you're talking about.
It's probably a lot funnier if you didn't watch Enterprise, because if you had, then you would have watched Enterprise and it would just be bringing up bitter memories.
Mm-hmm.
No, I actually did enjoy Enterprise. People had badmouthed it so much that I had very, very low expectations. So when I finally saw it, I'm like, this isn't so bad.
Yeah. It was a long road getting from there to here, but now I like it. Yeah, I'm with you on that, Brian. There are episodes which are just lackluster. They're meh, but there's also some good Star Trek in there.
Mm-hmm. And I'll always like Scott Bakula.
Yeah.
I mean, yes.
I haven't gotten yet to the point. I need to watch. I guess I'll finish Strange New Worlds and then cancel Paramount Plus because the Star Trek Prodigy is on Netflix.
Yes.
Yes, I've seen a couple of episodes of that.
My daughter and I have really enjoyed that.
We'll see what happens when Academy releases, if that tempts me back into Paramount Plus, or if I wait for VES to send me a free screener.
Did you get a chance to watch any of Picard?
Yes, I had. I was actually current on Picard.
Oh, okay.
Before then, because that was one of the shows that VES sent me, and I actually watched instead of putting it on and like, oh, I'll watch that later. Oh, darn, it's expired.
Yeah, I got you. I don't know if it will ever happen, but I really would, like so many others, like to see a 7 of 9 centric show.
That would be good.
I mean, the name being thrown around is Star Trek Legacy, but giving her the captain's chair, seeing a show about her relation with new crewmen. I mean, okay, baby Picard can be there or not, give or take. But I think that it could be a gold mine of some really great storytelling. And I feel like they're not focusing on that. They should give a good hard look at that.
Yeah, I was really impressed with her screen presence. As an actress, I think she grew a lot since Voyager.
Oh,
and
yes.
I was going to say that like Jerry Ryan had, I mean, I thought that she had a great screen presence on, in Voyager in terms of exploring her character as much as she was allowed to on an episodic kind of show. But seeing her come back in Picard and had obviously had so much development since then, I thought that her screen presence was just incredible on Picard. I would watch that show.
Absolutely. And that brings my Geek Out to a close. Who's next?
I'll pick it up. The first thing on my Geek Out is, have either of you heard of a game called Ultimate Chicken Horse?
No, I saw this on your list and I was really hoping that it was a new anime to drive James crazy.
I am now really regretting that I let it slip that it was a game rather than telling James that it was this really great anime that I was watching. But alas.
Actually, that sounds like a Japanese game show that it would be making huge waves overseas.
I mean, honestly, the vibe of this game is not far off of a Japanese game show.
Eat this meat. Is it chicken or horse?
Oh, I need to go throw up now. Good night, everybody. It's Zombie Apocalypse Strategy of the Week. Be safe and something else. Be geeky. Bye.
What's sad, though, is there's weirder stuff than that.
Yeah, like served at an IKEA. All right, so whose Geek Out was it?
Still yours.
Yeah. All right, just checking. Look, Ultimate Chicken Horse is a game where the level designers are clearly insane and hate the players because you're the level designer. What it is it's kind of a sandbox party game where you have the start of a level and then you have the end of the level, and it's all fitting more or less on one screen. And the point is to platform game your way from the start to the finish. And there's very little in the middle. And so they give you the tools to make that as easy or as complicated, generally as complicated as possible. And so you can lay down, of course, platforms, steel girders, wrecking balls, black holes, crossbows, fire cannons, just all kinds of things that make some components of the game easier and some components of the game harder. And if you all make it, nobody gets points. If everybody dies, nobody gets points. But if at least one person dies, anybody who makes it gets points. So it really just inspires you to be as hateful to yourself and others as possible. And it is just a cobbled together mess that just has our family in stitches. Just, I have never died so many times in a row and laughed so hard at the way that I died. It's a great 2 to probably 8 player game.
It sounds like one that I should play with my sister.
You know, how much do you love your sibling, and are you okay with not loving them after? So it's kind of one of those things that we will have our kiddo playing with us, and she'll put something like right at the entrance that, if you're not paying attention, is just an insta kill on everybody. So like as soon as you see the go, it's like jump to whatever is coming, and like, why do you hate us so much? And she's just laughing.
I have 2 thoughts. The first is the designers, I'm sure in a future interview they'll reveal that we took a look at how much a bad game of Monopoly can hurt the family dynamic. We ramped that to 11 and created Ultimate Chicken Horse. Second, I'm looking at some screenshots, and the gloriness is in its simplicity, in that it looks like when a 6 or 7-year-old is bored in school or at church, and they have a piece of paper and a pencil, and they begin designing their base. You know, what they want their treehouse to look like, or their castle, filled with buzzsaws and rockets and horses flying through the air and traps and ladders. And that's the aesthetic which the designers have gone with, and it fits so perfectly.
Oh, and the fact that you can glue obstacles to other obstacles, like there are some things that will move and pivot, and or that will slide back and forth, and then I don't know, just go ahead and glue a crossbow to it, and now you have a mobile crossbow series of arrows.
If you kill a horse, does that become glue? Because that feels very appropriate.
I actually think the glue is actually honey or something, but you get it's sure. I know. Another thing that's on my Geek Out though is a show called Scavenger's Reign that's on Netflix. Have either of you heard of that?
No, this is the first.
Holy crap. Okay. This show is about some people that were on an interstellar ship. There was some kind of emergency. They had to jettison out, and they landed on what I don't know the name of the planet off the top of my head, but it's Space Australia. Everything there is alien and wants to kill you. And so some people obviously made it, some people didn't. And in the first episode, these pockets of people, they're all separated out because their landing craft came down in different areas. They see some hope of making it off the planet, and so they're all on their individual journeys to this place, and the entire season is about their journey of, do we get off or do we not get off this planet? And the thing that makes it really so interesting is, first of all, they're not afraid to explore the humanity of these characters, to unpack what's going on behind the scenes in terms of their psychology and their motivations, and also their, for lack of better term, their droids, because there is one character, Levi, who's just a robot, and they make sure that they make you understand this is just a robot. They're like what is the first thing I'm going to do once I get off of here? You're going to sell me and buy a new bike. That's right. But really exploring the humanity of this android as they're developing from just tool to companion. And it's that's fascinating. And also the sound design is really, really, really good, because you have action sequences that are really well captured, And it's very easy to take on the emotions of a scene. Like if there's a really intense scene, it's easy to just internalize all of that anxiety and tension. But the musical score that they have is so good at contrasting a sound that doesn't amp you up, but still heightens still accents the tension of the scene. And it has this weird chill, but I'm invested despite their peril. And it's a wonderfully creative show that is evolutionarily impossible to improbable, probably more impossible, but you don't care. It's just so wonderfully exotic and alien and beautiful and horrifying all at the same time. So
on my list that goes.
Same.
And the last thing on my Geek Out is, have any of you heard of this thing called Star Wars Acolyte?
Yes.
Yeah.
I may have seen a commercial or 10.
Yeah.
All kinds of news about it, and have been watching Star Trek instead.
Well, I mean, that's you're not making wrong choices, really. Like, I have very carefully avoided news about Star Wars Acolyte, because one of the things that I know is easy to do is to say, oh, it's Star Wars, we can hate that because it's safe to hate. And it seems like it doesn't matter what is going on in Star Wars, there are enough people that will loudly jump up and down and tell you to hate it and not enjoy it. Mm-hmm. Like, dude, the first episode has not even been aired yet, but still I hate it. Like, okay, that's cool. So have any of you actually seen any of it?
No, not yet.
I am actually all caught up on it.
No way. What do you think? You can hate it. That's fine.
I don't hate it, but I'm not excited about it either.
Gotcha.
There are parts that I thought were well done. I liked the look and the aesthetic.
Yeah.
But the acting is okay. Some of the characters are interesting. There are none that have... The first character whom I met that I thought, ooh, I can't wait to find more about this person's history and backstory and see what decisions they make for the future, is dead in the first 5 minutes.
Yeah, that's my experience with Game of Thrones.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the writers went to the George R.R. Martin School of Writing and Discourse. So they were like, we're going to be even more efficient. We're not going to wait till the end of the first season. We're going to do it in the first 5 minutes of the first episode. So, I mean, it's Star Wars, so there's going to be plot holes big enough to drive a Star Destroyer through. But I found some of their plot decisions to be, frankly, just lazy. And also kind of insulting to the audience. I mean, I'm still going to watch it. I want to see where it goes, but it's gotten a very mild reaction from me.
And the crowd goes mild.
It's not vitriolic hate, but mostly I'm disappointed.
Gotcha.
Because I know they can do better. They've already done better. It's not too much for me to want to keep them at a higher standard. So when I'm given this, which feels half-hearted, I'm just disappointed.
Gotcha. Okay, I'm going to ask you to not read Crystal Star then.
Yeah. That ship of tears sailed decades ago.
That is my running low bar for Star Wars. But it's funny because I've actually been, and I tend to start off really, really warm on Star Wars series and tend to cool towards the end. It's like Ahsoka I started off really strong on until I watched it and then I sat back and like, oh, wait a minute. I mean, that
I did the same thing.
At any point, that show could have just, all those bad things could have just not happened. If at any critical decision, she could have just gone and had tea instead.
Yeah.
But Acolyte, I've actually been enjoying. I mean, I see what you're saying is that there are a lot of plot things that just aren't explained.
There are also a lot of missed opportunities, I feel.
Okay.
I mean, we get our first Wookiee Jedi, and I'm not going to say anymore because I don't want to spoil it for those who haven't seen it. But when I first saw him, I was like, cool, I like him. He looks a bit Harry and the Henderson-like, but I'm going to forgive that. And I want more of this guy. And
there's not a whole lot of that guy.
Things happen. And That's just one example, and I don't want to spend too much on your geek out about it, but
Well, I asked, and that's kind of when we're doing it. But
I know, but I could go on, and I'm not going to.
I imagine after I see what I have to say, you're not going to be able to help yourself, James, and that's okay. Because I've actually really been enjoying it. And I think that they started particularly strong with really good fight choreography. And I know, okay.
That I will agree completely.
Yeah.
Especially in the first couple of episodes, really, really good fights. It was like crouching Minoc, hidden Wampa. That's the only way I could describe it. But very, very well done. I found these were excellent fights we were seeing in Star Wars that didn't involve a lightsaber.
I know. And the thing is that not only was it just like, oh, that's a cool fight, because just a fight on its own doesn't really do anything, but they're actually able to use the fight in order to show character and actually able to, it's part of the story where you can see that one of these Jedi Masters is taking a look at this obvious not force potential, but force user. And he's doing kind of like the wise old martial arts master of like deflecting and evading. He is not really fighting. She's fighting, but he is trying to figure her out. He's more evading than, it's like, I need to subdue this person, and I need to figure out where she is and where she's come from and what's going on with her. And I think that those were fascinating character moments, even though it was an action moment.
I would have loved to have heard the line, "Stop dancing around and fight me. I'm not fighting you, child. I'm grading you."
that is accurate.
And right now you're at a C plus.
Yeah, you're at a C plus for effort. No, let's. We're not talking about what the actual result is. But some of the things that I wish were stronger is actually, I feel like we're going to get some sort of cynical story about Jedi cover-ups of wrongdoings, which is kind of part of
where
the
they're
plot.
Leading to it. Yeah,
and on some level, like, okay, yeah, that's interesting. I just hope that they don't go too cynical with it. It's going to go there because it doesn't matter what organization that you're a part of. There are some choices where people have made that they don't want to talk about. And even if they started with the best of intentions, it's like, oh, that follow through actually was not great. And I hope that it doesn't go too far, but I think that taken in moderation at this point is interesting enough, because they give somebody an opportunity to get absolution by saying, okay, just fess up publicly to what you did. And then there's absolution. And instead the person winds up dead instead. Like they would rather take their secret to the grave.
Yeah, I feel like we missed some steps.
And it makes me wonder how bad it was. Like there's a mystery here. And so I think everything is going to hinge on how well do they wrap it up. Because I think that everything in this could go really, really well, or it could be like, oh, that had so much potential. But so far, I'm enjoying it. By the time the episode releases, I might come back and say, yeah, guys, can we edit my whole thing out about Acolyte and we can talk about I'll just talk about Doctor Who and we just snip that in instead.
I will say that they have given us a really cool villain design. The smiley face helmet, this sinister look, the red lightsaber. So, will he continue to be the primary antagonist? I doubt it, but he has a cool look. There was a cool reveal at the end of episode, I think it was 4. Some people refer to him as Smilo Ren, which I found hilarious.
Gosh, I wish I thought of that.
I know, right? That's gold. But even with a great name like that, I think he looks cool. My request is just don't ruin it.
I think that Smilo Ren is actually her traveling companion who's just been pretending. I
think that's obvious.
So anyway, watch me wind up being wrong at the next episode. This is going to be out of date fast, but I don't care.
Anyone who's listened to Bryan and I's Wheel of Time podcast knows how wrong my predictions are. So We'll see where things go. I will hope. I will hope that I will be wrong and that it will just get better.
Or you could just not like it, which is also fine. Like, I don't like everything Star Wars. We don't have
There's
to.
plenty of Star Wars I don't like. I'm going to talk about that in a little bit.
Oh no! Like, okay, well, while you go on not liking things, I'm gonna go ahead and re-listen to the Heir to the Empire audiobook for the 57,000th time. Anyway, so that's the end of my Geek Out.
Well, we're going to roll right into more Star Wars for the beginning of my Geek Out. So, here and there over the years, I have tried to show my kids the Star Wars movies. When they were younger, I will admit there was not much interest, which is fine. They really enjoyed some of the toys, and they enjoyed the Lego games. And so their first experience with much of Star Wars was through Star Wars Lego, which I was fine with. They had fun, and I knew the day would probably come. They might like the movies as well. This past May, on May the 4th, I decided we're going to have a Star Wars movie day at the house. Everyone's going to get a new Star Wars t-shirt. We watched A New Hope, which is where you begin.
Fair.
There is no argument on that. That's where you begin.
You'll have no disputes from us.
That's right. And the boys got into it. They were instantly asking to watch the next one. So we went to Empire Strikes Back and then Return of the Jedi, all within about a week. So far, the boys' favorite has been Return of the Jedi. They wanted to watch more, and we watched The Phantom Menace, Attack of the Clones, and Revenge of the Sith. I have one boy, his favorite is Revenge of the Sith, and the other one is still Return of the Jedi. So then they asked for more. And then we hit the sequel trilogy. Now, no, technically we could have watched
Rogue One,
but that I'm going to save until they're a bit older.
Okay, fair. That's a gut punch.
We might, yeah, it's got a bit of a gut punch, and well, more than one gut punch. We might watch Solo because, contrary to a lot of opinion, I really enjoyed it. I thought it was a great movie, and it deserved a better reception. If anything else, we should have gotten more of Donald Glover as Lando.
Yeah.
Oh.
He absolutely should have at least gotten a Disney miniseries because he did so good.
Oh my gosh, there's so much room there.
Mm-hmm. More of Donald Glover in a yellow cape, Disney. That's really all we want. Anyway, so we watched The Force Awakens. We watched The Last Jedi. The boys watched it. I suffered through it. I gave it another chance. I'm like, okay, this is every geek parent's dream. Sitting with my kids, watching a Star Wars movie. There are parts I enjoyed, and just most of it that still just left a horribly bad taste in my mouth and in my soul. I will say this about Rian Johnson. He makes excellent movies. He has a very fascinating and interesting style. I give him full applause on his Knives Out movies. Those are great.
We'll watch those so many times.
Yeah, they're good. He's the wrong choice for a Star Wars movie. People will argue with me. People will have their own opinion. That's firmly my opinion. He's the wrong choice for a Star Wars movie. Anyway, moving on. We have yet to watch The Rise of Skywalker. And we'll probably do that within the next week. And then we'll watch Solo. We'll see what we watch from there. If they're still in a Star Wars movie, we could reenact my childhood and just watch A New Hope so many times until I have the entire movie, alien lines and all, memorized. But that was a different era. That was the age
Show
of
them
VHS.
the Christmas special, you coward.
No, because I love my children. And I'm going to save that for a very special punishment, particularly egregious disobedience. Plus, I think it's against the Geneva Convention to show that to anyone underage. I'll have to look into the bylaws.
Get your children taken away for showing them the Christmas special.
My co-host told me to do it. No. So really enjoyed, for the most part, watching the Star Wars movies with them. It's something that's so important to me and been such a big part of my life. To be able to watch it with them and talk about it with them has just been a fulfillment of a little fantasy of mine. Here's to more viewings in the future. I talked a lot about how I really enjoyed the PlayStation game Horizon Zero Dawn. Well, I finally was able to get a copy of Horizon Forbidden West, which is the sequel. And boy, is it just as good as the first one. Still just gorgeous graphics, good storyline, great gameplay mechanics. It really leaves the door open for a third game, which I'm sure will come out in the next few years, as popular as they have been. And I got the DLC called Burning Shores, which takes you to Los Angeles. And you get to see LA as a cesspit of salt water, burning lava, and decay and destruction. So not that different than it is right now.
Fiction.
Yeah,
Yeah, I was like, Bryan, like you're the resident expert. How's that coming?
It's on course. Yeah, I thought the game was set hundreds of years in the future, but no, it's really just 3. So I'm getting close to finishing up this DLC too, and I've enjoyed it because I had kind of hit a stall about what I wanted to play and not really finding any games which were striking my fancy. I was kind of I am all played out on Destiny and probably will be for a long time. This copy of Forbidden West was perfectly timed. Speaking of well-timed, I also got a chance to get caught up on the anime My Hero Academia.
Oh, wow, I fell off.
Started another season.
They started season 7. And they're like 5 or 6 episodes into that, I believe. But I was able to get caught up on the rest of season 6 when they finally released the dub for it on Hulu. And just good. Just fun. Just really fun. I was very happy to see a type of, I won't say reconciliation, but just a resolution to the whole Deku and Bakugo dynamic.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, are they friends now?
I wouldn't say friends, but less of enemies than Bakugo is with anyone else.
Yeah,
Fair enough.
Bakugo's getting a lot more self-awareness. Not completely, but more.
There's growth there, at least. Yeah. My main gripe has always been like how much others have always tolerated his behavior and his treatment of others. But now we're seeing some actual growth into some semblance of a, functional human being in how he acts. So, yeah, I was really worried when he finally chose his hero name and it was like Supreme Dynamite Murder God or something like that. It's like, wow.
I kind of forgot that his hero name wasn't Bakugo, but anyway.
Who knows how long it'll be for season 7 to be released in dub. I'm just kind of stuck on it that way. I like the American voices that they have, so I don't think I'll ever watch the subtitled version just because I enjoy the dub too much. And if I have to wait, I'm fine with that, but hopefully it won't be too long. And finally, last bit of my Geek Out, because I've gone on too long, is that my wife and I are beginning to prep for a big trip. This August, we will be celebrating our 20th anniversary. So,
wow. Has it been that long?
It has been that long. Almost 20 years married, or 21 years time served, as I like to say. We wanted to do something big. And due to some planning with some other friends of ours, we are going to try this October to take another trip to England. We're pushing it off a couple of months for several reasons. One, August is the busiest and most expensive month in the year for us. Between kids' birthdays, all 3 of the kids have birthdays in that month. Back to school, and so much more. It's just there's too much going on for us to try to plan to do anything other than like having a nice dinner together in the evening. So we'll push it back a couple of months. Wait until it's not so much of a there's not as much travel going on, especially to various tourist destinations in England. Also, the weather is cooler, which I would prefer. And some very dear friends of ours named Chris and Sharon. We met them when we were in Colorado. He was a firefighter in the Air Force. She is actually from England, from a little town called Felixstowe. They're going to be in England at the exact same time. And so we've decided, you know what, let's make it a joint trip. We might be able to stay with some of their family, hopefully bring the cost down, hit up some places that we know and love together. They'll show us around to some places that we have not heard of. The last time we went, all the way back in 2010, we went for 3 weeks. This time we're hoping to just go for 10 days because we loved all 3 weeks of it. But at the end of the second week, in middle of the third, we're getting a little tired. We've been away from home a long time. We're wanting to go home now. So 10 days is enough time to make it around the country, see some great stuff without it becoming a forced march of fun.
Right.
And in order to also keep costs down, we're going to really keep the number of times we hit a restaurant to a minimum. They've got fantastic grocery stores over there, so we'll get food for dinner and lunches from like the Sainsbury's, the Tesco's, and so on. And probably for like the travel part, we'll forget getting a car. We'll just take the train. I love going on trains, and their public transportation system over there is phenomenal. So right now we're still very much in the planning period. Still a lot to do. And that will wrap up my Geek Out. So let's head to our main topic.
All right, so I don't remember exactly when or why the topic came up, but I was really interested in discussing how to adjudicate and how to deal with failures in RPGs. Because what I've experienced, especially early in my game mastering career, was that you'd have something that the player characters need to get done in order to advance through your story or your scenario or whatever, and they fail, picking the lock. And it's like, okay, well, I guess just take a few minutes and roll again. I found that failure was, just stopping progress. And it's like, that's not good gaming. That's not good story. It's not fun for anybody when, okay, now we just have to find a different thing that we can roll on in order to progress in this because we're stymied by a bad roll.
Yeah.
So I was just really interested in hearing your perspectives on that.
I have a lot of perspectives on failure, really. I learned that by me going back through my notes and saying, I really should trim a lot of this. I think that there's a difference between good failure and bad failure, because I think that failure is actually really, really important to a narrative. The first game that I ever GM'd failed because I didn't let the characters fail. I was afraid of ruining people's good time, so I set difficulties too low. Sometimes I let a munchkin talk me out of failure scenarios, and generally there was just way too much win. And I think that one of the reasons why the campaign fizzled is just because there was way too much Mary Sue power fantasy and no real sense of challenge, no feeling of the threat of failure. And if everything is too easy, then it doesn't feel earned.
Yeah, and I think a lot of GMs probably have had that experience. I know I did in my first Middle-earth role-playing campaigns where, I don't know, it's like a level 8 character killed a Balrog. No, this shouldn't happen.
Yeah.
It's probably pretty rare that an inexperienced GM can be balanced. It's either going to be Monty Hall or, the Psycho Killer.
Yeah, and some of the most memorable game experiences that I've seen are not when everybody succeeds and they super duper win and they defeat the big bad and then they go home and have a parade. I mean, those are important closure narratives, but the stories that I hear people talk about in their game experiences is some of their most glorious goof ups. Because I think that part of a good story is discovering the unexpected through collective narrative. And no one likes a story where every move is predictable. And the failures, when they're well done, surprise both the GM and player. And they make it collaborative storytelling. And they make it for a very relatable human dynamic of play. And I think that can make that very memorable.
I think what's important is that we need to remove the stigma around the idea of failure. Because in real life, failure can be just as or more educational than success. No one sets out to fail, but it happens, and we can learn from that. Traditionally, most players can see the idea of failure as leading to, at best, not completing a quest. So you're not going to get any potential rewards, treasures, magical items, heaps of gold, and clues to lead you to the next part of the story. At worst, it can lead to the dreaded TPK, total party kill. in a campaign either being over or having to be restarted with fresh characters. And I think that there is something even worse than that. Failure can lead to a loss of interest.
Oh, yeah. I have actually seen that happen where it was kind of a combination of poor expectations and the player not understanding the game system. And I can't remember even what game system we were playing, but the character was really, really not optimized. And so just couldn't succeed on things. Actually, if you're listening to Dark Mage of Rudar, we kind of had that with Jacob's character, Mechanic, who was a scout, the equivalent of the rogue in Middle Earth role playing, and he decided to wear plate armor,
Clink,
which
clank,
just
clink, 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 clunk.
handicapped the heck out of him because plate armor is meant to be worn by a character on a horse. So he's got 15 feet of movement every turn, and everybody else is moving 50, 60 feet. He was a good sport about it and didn't really lose interest. But that kind of unoptimized character, I wish I could remember that other game that happened. But the player just got fed up not being able to contribute anything because their skills were too low. They weren't set up in such a way as to be able to be successful. And so the failures just killed their interest and they stopped playing altogether.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So I guess we have to explore what is it that makes for good failure and how do we avoid bad failure in a game? And one of the things that I think contributes to poor failure is if a GM would almost use failed rolls as a way to punish players for their random number generator generating the wrong number. And that's no fun. So if you see a failed roll as your way to sort of exercise cruelty on a player and invite negativity through I'm going to be merciless and sadistic, then I think that you've maybe had some poor role models in your role playing.
Yeah. I mean, failure should have consequences, but not punishment.
Right. Yeah. It should never be punishing. It should never be unrecoverable. I mean, I've heard stories where in a Star Wars game, somebody started to throw a grenade and they failed, so they had to roll their grenade scatter diagram, and they rolled a 1, so it tossed it right back at them. And so like, oh shoot, I need to dodge, and then they failed the dodge roll and rolled a 1, and like, well, I guess it explodes right next to you. I guess you just roll to absorb all that grenade damage. And then they failed that. I mean, that was a series of failed rolls. And the character died because of just bad luck. And so I don't think that failure, even in sequence or series like that, should be so punishing or unrecoverable.
I was going to talk about this later, but it fits better here. I had a experience in the Alternity RPG, which is a science fiction from the late 80s, early 90s. And I had made this techie character. The GM was kind of trying to emulate Mass Effect. So I made the tech. It's like I focused all of my skills on hacking and flying spaceships and repairing stuff. And for some reason, if I was making a combat roll, which I was not spec'd for at all, I hit every time. But every single time I made a tech-related roll, I failed.
Oh my gosh!
And we're leading into Act 3, and we run a blockade out of the planet that we're on. I'm flying the ship, and I fail my piloting roll for the blockade run. So I was like, well, we don't want to stop the game right here. So okay, the ship is damaged, and you've got to repair it in flight. Well, I failed my repair roll. And so we're coming out of hyperspeed too fast, and we're going to run into Mars. Like, okay, well, I still got a chance to try and like dodge the planet, and we'll do a slingshot thing. And I failed that one. It's like, okay, no, we're going to hit Mars. Okay, I'm going to try and just use the atmosphere for braking, and maybe we can crash land on Mars, and not everybody will die. And I failed that roll. And so it's like everybody else is like, okay, we're abandoning ship at this point. You do what you want, but we're jumping out. It's like, okay. if I can't get the ship down, you're going to be stranded on Mars with no way to get off forever, and you only have like 6 hours of oxygen. So I'm going to try and do what I can to try and just save like the skeleton of the ship so that you have someplace to shelter. I failed that role. And at every point, the GM is giving me opportunities to say, you can bail out and survive. Okay, now you can bail out and probably be seriously injured, but survive. Okay, you can bail out and probably be in a coma for the rest of the adventure. No, it's too late. I crashed that ship into Mars so hard.
That
Left a
first
crater
of all,
named
the
after him.
odds. Yeah.
I know. I calculated it, and it was literally astronomical. I mean, the number of failed rolls all in a row that I managed to get was just completely unlikely.
And it sounds like that wasn't overtly punishing because you had the opportunity to cut bait at any time. Like the GM was giving you your out. Like you can have your out, or you can continue to plumb the depths of the possibilities of failure. And it sounds like you kind of got what you wanted almost. Like that isn't the scenario you wanted.
Yeah, but
it sounds like
I was committed to trying to save my team. And it got down to the very last roll, and the GM says, okay, it's impossible. You can no longer survive this, but you can make another roll to try and save the ship, and maybe your team will have a place to shelter. Nope, failed that one too.
Oh my gosh.
Speaking of never telling me the odds, I was going to save this for later as well, but it seems to fit perfectly here. Sometimes there's no good failures or bad failures. Sometimes there's just straight failure. And I was with some others in another Star Wars game with Bryan. We had a gentleman who had made a character who also was spec'd interestingly. He and I were both playing Force-sensitive characters. He tried to do something.
Same.
He failed. He tried to do something else with it. He failed. More. Failed. I'm going to spend some Force points. Okay. That also failed. What then occurred was a series of bad decisions and failed rolls, and not deciding to just cut and run, that it came down to a final roll where Bryan said, you have to succeed. If you don't, things are going to go very bad for you. He's like, I got this. He rolls, and Bryan looked at him and said, I will never forget these words. Congratulations, you have just turned to the dark side. Without even pausing for breath, he turns to me and says, you sense a disturbance in the Force.
And the best thing about this, he had these dice. They were black dice with white pips. And the entire game, they rolled nothing but failures. And he's doing things that's like, okay, I'm going to reach out to the troopers on the Star Destroyer and bend their minds so that they start shooting at the other Star Destroyer. I'm like, okay, that is definitely dark side territory. So you have to make your dark side roll. And he fails this. And so then he gets in a fight with the light side character, James's character. And suddenly those black dice with white pips were rolling hot.
Yeah. Suddenly they were on fire. So I raced to confront him. And I tried to talk him out of it. But no, the dark side has him. And he's gleeful in his dark-sidedness. And we get into a fight, and he just starts rolling me. Like, my dice are coming up horrible. He's rolling hot. I mean, he could have won millions at Vegas at this point. And it got to the point that the only reason I survived is because the GM bent the laws of space and time and made it so that backup arrived just in time to save my scrawny neck.
Well, it sounds like those dice were attuned to the dark side. So I think that
we started calling them the dark side dice.
Yes. I mean, it wasn't the character who fell. It was the dice who fell. So, I mean, sometimes that's the way the dice fall.
Yeah. And about that, I think this next thing I think ties into something that
our habit, we have lost track of our outline entirely.
No, we haven't. No. Because I actually think that it ties into something that Bryan was talking about earlier, which is, sometimes it's the dice that fail. I mean, yes, you also have to understand that if you're crafting a narrative, there's going to be an opportunity to roll the dice, and there's going to be an opportunity that everyone might fail. And what do you do if everyone does fail to, as you said, to unlock that door? maybe you shouldn't have a skill roll that would ever halt the progression of a narrative. And if there is this possibility that they need to do this thing to succeed, maybe to have more than one way around that problem. Yeah, you might have all failed to pick that lock, but is that the only way out of the room? It would be more exciting and a bit more dynamic rather than, shoot, I guess we got to try again. We could do 3 hours of everybody just trying until they get the right number. But maybe you could try searching for a key, searching for a combination. Maybe is there a ventilation shaft? There's other things that you could be doing that also don't that either don't involve re-rolling the same skills, or maybe don't have skill rolls that just halt the progression of your narrative.
One of the things I like that Tales from the Loop does is if there's a skill roll that it needs to succeed in order for the game to proceed. And a failure doesn't mean you did not succeed at that task. The failure means you had some consequences. The standard ones are you take a condition. Okay, yeah, you jimmy the door open, but you cut your hand open with your tool, and so now you have the injured condition, which makes future rolls harder. But it wasn't you failed your roll and therefore you didn't do it. It's you failed your roll and now you have a consequence.
And there's also an opportunity that if there's something that needs to be discovered in order for the narrative to progress, make everybody roll perception and let the person who rolled the highest have their moment. So just because everybody rolled poorly doesn't mean that, okay, well, now you have a sneak attack. Sometimes that's narratively appropriate, but sometimes there's an opportunity of just letting one person have their moment. And that could be the determination. I think that there's also something to be said about failures being more than just the thing you wanted to happen didn't happen. And I think that we're going to talk a little bit more about this later as we talk about failing forward, or basically failures can make the scene more exciting rather than just, okay, well, your skill roll was a dud, because failure can be dynamic. When I
kind of like the way you're phrasing that here. The thing that you wanted to happen didn't happen, comma, something else happened instead.
Right. My eldest was in a D&D game where they failed an archery roll so spectacularly. So they were trying to rescue a princess, and so they were using a bow and arrow. So they let their arrow fly, and it missed horribly. And instead of it just missing, it struck something else, which knocked something off of the cart and onto the princess's head and knocked the princess clean out. And so so now they've got an unconscious princess on the hand. Like, does that really make the whole thing like worse? Well, yes, but not mechanically. It's like, oh no, I knocked out the princess. And unfortunately, she failed her next roll, and because apparently she really was terrible at archery, and just as the princess was getting back up and recovering, like, knocked something else and knocked the princess out again. Like, so it was just a series of continuing to knock this princess out, who could have gotten up and run away, but didn't because of the failed rolls. Like, they were, the plan was a kidnapping, so it didn't really make it worse, but it narratively made it worse.
As an aside, that was something I actually enjoyed about the Iron Crown Enterprises Middle Earth game, which, if you're listening to the
tables?
The fumble tables, which you might get to hear some of in the Dark Mage of Rudar on Geek at Arms actual play. But I remember reading them years ago. Some of the descriptions just made me laugh so hard. They had so many outcomes listed, like if you're using a spear on horseback and you fail, and if you roll within these numbers, your spear will become embedded into the ground. You will be pole vaulted off of the horse, damaging your brain, perforating your spleen, and causing you to question everything that you have done up to this point.
That, by the way, is the absolute worst possible result on the hand-arm stumble table.
I think that sounds like that would actually be an interesting character moment if it was built like that. That if we have the series of fumbles and well, maybe I am a really crappy cavalier. Can we have these failures actually have maybe character moments? Maybe these are things to develop from. But that's that really has to make sense within the context of the game.
Well, if you roll the 1% chance twice, then it's absolutely a character feature at that point.
Oh, that's fantastic. Well,
that's not a rule. If you manage to do it twice, that's going to be part of you forever.
I mean, I feel like it would be for me if that was my life. So, other things that I've seen GMs do that I don't particularly like as a part of failure, especially even if it's critical failure, if your game has that, is the worst possible outcome. Like, you can have something fail or fail miserably or even make something else happen in a dynamic scene without it being the worst imaginable scenario for a player. Because again, you're trying to be a facilitator of fun. A wise woman once referred to the GM as the fun-cilitator, and I will let that stick in my brain forever. Thank you very much, Jenny Dixon. I hope you hear this. She won't, but that's fine. The thing with facilitating people's fun is, I suppose if narratively, if this is the type of tone of the game where it's a comedy of errors, then the worst possible scenario is fine. I mean, especially as some of my games get to be a bit cartoonish. But even in cartoonish games, having the worst possible thing is something that you can shake off and keep moving. But I think that trying to find some sort of creative awfulness is not in keeping with generating a fun narrative for everybody. One of the things, especially in critical fails or any type of failure, especially if you're dealing with social failure, is not taking away player agency. I've made the mistake a couple of times when players have tried to assess a situation, and they've rolled not only failure but complication and made the scene more dynamic. But I've said, as a result, you do this. And I think that's the wrong kind of complication, because I think that players should have the ability to have autonomy with their characters. They should be able to decide their characters' internal states, even if you could give them bad information to say, though as a player, this is not correct. Your character believes this to be correct. What do you do? Rather than telling them, and as a result, you do this.
Yeah, I've found myself falling into that occasionally too, and even if what my decision or my narration says is entertaining and the player likes it, I listen back to some of those things that I've said in Tales from the Loop, and I cringe a little bit, like, oh no, I should have let him decide his response. I make suggestions rather than making decrees.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea, is like, oh, you fail, and with complication, you understand, your character understands this. What do we think about your character doing X or Y or Z as a result? Like, or, making suggestions is perfectly fine, but at least checking in with the player is a good idea.
Yeah. There's an exception to that specifically in the rules for Call of Cthulhu, where if you fail your sanity roll by or you lose a certain amount of sanity, you do lose control of the character temporarily. You may or may not have memory of whatever you did when you regain control.
I think that's different, though, in a game where you are mutually agreeing to decide together to play a game where that is part of the dynamic. Because I think that's even part of session 0. We all know that this is what's going to happen. You say, yeah, that's part of this game and why I've chosen to play this game, as opposed to putting players in unexpected narrative situations.
Right.
And also, I think that kind of the last thing in, what makes good or bad failure is remembering that not everything requires a roll. Because if there's a chance that somebody could fail, and especially if it's a system where there is a critical fail, sometimes you can just let people do things. There was a friend who had a legendarily bad adventure with a newbie DM. A person got stung by a bee-like creature, and it was like a critical hit, so that the bee sting was in their chest and the bee flew away and the stinger stayed in. And they must have made some sort of critical fail on top of that. And so they said, well, I want to pull the stinger out. And the DM made them a roll to pull the stinger out. And they critically failed. So the DM rolled that when he pulled it out, the stinger came out, but the barbs did damage on the way out. And I think the character died. And I think that is not a good first session with a level 1 character. Like, just let them pull the stinger out and let them recover.
Yeah.
Give it some color. If they've made a failed save of something, like, oh, you find out you're terribly allergic to bee stings and you have to spend the next day puffed up like the Marshmallow Man.
Oh, that would have been a good one.
Yeah.
But it's purely color and it's not killing them.
It also invites some interesting role playing.
I can imagine them going to the inn. What did he say? He said he would like a room for the night.
I'm sorry, you can't stay here. You clearly have the plague.
He looks in his puffed up state. He looks exactly like a wanted poster. I mean, there's so many things you can do here. I actually did. Okay, this violated so many of my rules, but I did it anyway. Somebody one time somebody had wanted posters of themselves out, and so what they wanted to do was to just go through and forge the entire stack of wanted posters and draw on them so it didn't look like them anymore. And they failed with a complication, or either that or they succeeded and they had, like, basically there was something bad that happened in the roll. Usually I say resolve that in the scene and let it happen right away. But over the next 3 or 4 adventures, they kept seeing the wanted posters distributed, and I kept modifying them and kept making them more and more elaborate with more drawings until they finally encountered a character that looked exactly like the one that was forged in the wanted poster. And he wanted to know who it was that got him pursued by these people. And so they had this dynamic fight after, and this was this was a month later, maybe 2 months in real time, that they had this happen. But it was it broke the rules, but I thought it was worth it, and so did they.
So we talked a little bit earlier about the concept of failing forward, which, to define that's using a bad roll to advance the story instead of stopping it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the first time I encountered this idea was in the West End Star Wars rules, where they describe Han Solo stepping on a stick and failing his sneak roll. But the complication that came from it was, hey, we met the Ewoks as a result of this failed roll. So I think that really shaped a lot of how I look at failure and what I try to do with it nowadays. I believe, Mike, you've got some familiarity with that rule set.
Yeah, I think that this is the way that you describe it transcends rule sets, and I thought it was really grand of the writers of West End Games to describe it as such. Generally, the way that I try to do something in terms of failing forward is, I think I'm better at it in the scene. So somebody fails a roll, but it creates an opportunity for somebody else to shine in light of what's happening. There was one time that I introduced something as pure window dressing, but the players decided to, that's not window dressing. That's the spotlight. We should be pursuing that. And so they wound up mounting these winged beasts to try to ride them to safety, even though their skill set would not at all allow them to do so. Like, I told them, like, this is crazy. This is insane. You guys are going to die. I love it. Let's do this. And they're like, wait, are we really going to die? I'm like, probably not. But I mean, like, it's an insane plan. Let's carry it through. And so, of course, while they're trying to ride these beasts they have no experience in, it turns into an aerial fight scene. And of course, somebody falls off the steed. So what that creates is not a splat and roll up a new character, but this is something that works cinematically. Okay, your friend is falling. What do you do? And somebody says, oh, I'm going to swoop down and I'm going to try to use my whip to lash onto the back of his ankle as he's falling. And so you kind of like a reverse Gandalf and Balrog thing. And so he, saving somebody as they're dangling from this winged steed, and other people kind of swooping in to try to lift him to safety. So this failure of this person falling off their steed is creating things for more people to do and making for a more exciting scene than just you fly away or you're having a fight.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that actually worked out. I ran Tomb of Horrors relatively recently, and we had a situation. The Tomb of Horrors is famous for instant death traps. And we had a situation like that where somebody opened a pit trap and dropped themselves and somebody else down it. But it gave them an opportunity to, oh, hey, I don't remember exactly what they did to save their companion, but they wound up being able to spider climb and stick to the wall and save the other person. Like, oh, well, you set off the instant death trap, but managed to survive it. Good job. Managed to get through Tomb of Horrors. Only one person died.
But I mean, failing forward also, when you have the situation where you say the worst possible scenario, James, will you have a TPK? I mean, you can even have, like, okay, suppose you're the GM and you have misevaluated where your players are at versus the combat level. It doesn't necessarily mean that it has to end in death. They could get captured. And so they wind up starting the next scene in prison. Having a jailbreak is a wonderful way of failing, but advancing the narrative forward. There's always something that you can do to make their unredeemable situation redeemable, because that's what makes for epic storytelling.
Oh, have you listened to the Legacy of Glass from MidMax?
No, I have that on my list, but I haven't.
Bump it up, because there's a terrific example of that kind of thing where one of the players failed actually, I don't even know if he failed it. I'm still in the middle of it. And he made the saving roll like 3 sessions ago. And Jeff Roma was the DM. And he said, okay, just write that saving roll. Don't tell me what it is. I'm not going to tell you what the DM you're rolling against is. And he's had 3 sessions of the experience of this character between finding out whether or not they're going to die from this roll.
Whoa. That is bold.
Wow.
So highly recommend that.
One thing that I've talked about a lot is I've thrown the word complications in. You've mentioned the Star Wars role-playing game, and one of the things that they introduce is complications on rolls. In Western games, there's 1 die in your dice pool that if it rolls a 6, it can explode, and you can have just escalating numbers into high heaven. Or you can roll a 1 on that wild die and you have options. You can just roll it in as normal, you can subtract the lowest and highest, or you can introduce a complication. And the rules kind of describe complications as bad things, and many people have interpreted that as critical failures. But I don't think you necessarily have to read it as a critical fail. Later editions of D6 games have called it critical fails, but I think that's too punishing to have a 1 in 6 chance of critical failure, regardless of
It's
what
also
you're.
not very interesting.
No, it's not. And especially if you have, okay, I rolled a 67 on these dice, but I rolled a 1. Do I still fail? Like, well, the DC on that was 10, but yeah, you fail. That's just absurd. So what I've done is said, okay, we'll let the numbers decide whether you succeed or fail. But if that 1 shows up, then maybe the thing you did succeeded, but the scene got more complicated and interesting. Like, for example, if somebody is shooting at you and you decide, okay, I'm going to dodge and dive for cover. Okay, roll it up. You succeed, but with a complication. Okay, you're out of the way of the blaster fire, but you realize the crate you dove behind is marked explosives. Like, now that's a more interesting scene and ironically funny, and I would absolutely do that in scene. But
And it provides opportunities, because if there's explosives in there, then that's another weapon.
who's it going to be a weapon for or against? We don't know, but they're still firing at those crates, so I would do something fast.
Yeah, I also like the idea of letting players narrate their own failures. Like, because there's 3 to 5 people at the table who aren't me, and collectively they're smarter than I am. And they're also way crueler to their characters than I am. It's like, we had a situation in Tales from the Loop where the kids are fighting this insane cyborg that wants to kill them and chop their bodies up and make more cyborgs out of them. And one of the players, rolled a failure, and I said, okay, well, you need to push this roll. You need to do something to get out of this. So take a condition and tell me what happens. And he says, I kind of want to lose a toe.
Yeah, I remember that. Like, dude is losing part of his foot. I can't believe he's doing that.
Wow, permanent damage. Interesting. But yeah, I never would have done that to a PC. I'm not going to chop pieces off of them.
No. And I would also
not in Tales from the Loop.
Well, first of all, I would have never tried to go toe to toe with a cyborg.
Yeah, he was charging directly into there with no backup was a pretty bold move.
It was a surprisingly bold move, but I think that there's also the opportunity to do those sort of things when you have enough trust between the players and GM. Mm-hmm. And I had wonderful success in failure when I was working with the Min-Max crew. If you haven't listened to one of the Geeks at Play adventures, Earth's Prettiest Human, and you want to see a lot, and I mean a lot, of spectacularly hilarious failure, that adventure is definitely the one to listen to. And I never, except maybe once or twice, suggested to them what happened when they failed, because we set up a scene to begin with that's relatively low stakes. Like, no one's going to die, at least not at the beginning. And so when they say, I want to do this, and I say, well, what did you roll? Like, a 1. Like, okay, well, what happened when you tried to do that thing? And they had so much investment in their own character's failure that I could never have thought of anything that deliciously hilarious. Mm-hmm. And also true to that character. I mean, they owned it and they loved it, and it was great.
There were moments like that in the podcast, The Adventure Zone, Amnesty. They were playing Monster of the Week, which is a powered by the Apocalypse system, which is another one that give the players the ability to narrate their failures on a bad roll. And it led to some dire and also hilarious consequences. At the end of one campaign, characters had gotten some new pieces of equipment, and one of them wanted a jetpack. He was diehard on wanting a jetpack. And I use the word diehard meaningfully, because when they got into a battle, he thought this is the perfect time to break out said backpack. He rolled to use the backpack. he failed the roll to use the backpack. And basically it had him, he narrated this himself, careening through the air, going circles around the bad guy, and I think going headfirst into an RB sign.
This person has never watched Return of the Jedi, have they?
You know they have. You know absolutely they've watched Return of the Jedi, and they absolutely did this on purpose. But is it harmful to their characters? Yes, but it also can contribute to some fantastic gameplay and storytelling, and just make a memorable moment. Heading back into what you were talking about earlier, how failures do make the best stories.
I think there's several systems that kind of lean into this idea that failures can be interesting, and that even successes, there can be gradations of success and failure.
Yeah, I think that we mentioned Star Wars already, the wild die. Again, I use complications in success. I use complications in failure. The rule set is not explicit enough to tell me whether or not I'm wrong, but if I'm wrong, then I'm going to continue to house rule it this way because I purchased the book. Thank you very much for the inspiration. It's my game now. But there's wonderful opportunities when somebody succeeds, but the scene gets more interesting and complicated. One last example of this, I had a Jedi who wanted to jump into a full troop cart of stormtroopers. This was in some sort of course, aerial. There's speeders going back and forth, and so they jumped into an open top speeder full of stormtroopers. And like 5 or 6 of these guys are no problem for me. And so he rolled to jump, and he rolled a 1 on the wild die, and he's like, "Okay, so what happens?" And I'm like, "Do I fall?" Like, no, you jump right into the middle of that cart full of stormtroopers. He's like, "Oh, okay then." And I said, "What your character does not realize is that in order to keep his royal guards battle hardened, he rotates into the rank and file stormtroopers his royal guard periodically." And I just kind of told him, this is a thing your character does not know. And one of the stormtroopers had their stats swapped out for a royal guardsman, and that wound up being what was supposed to be, I'm going to jump in and go chop sake, was suddenly a fight for his life. And he absolutely loved the back and forth of that scene.
It reminds me of also in Star Wars, I came into a campaign. Bryan allowed me to have a ship that I had found in one of the old Star Wars adventure journals, if anyone remembers those.
I do.
A Mon Calamari freighter. I was taking the characters to, actually it might have been, we're heading to Mon Calamari. And
that one. I was wondering where you were going with that.
And we were having to dodge Imperial fighters and roll through the air, and I was trying to just get us to land on a platform. And my piloting rolls were not doing great. And in fact, they were bad enough that we were going to crash. And I'm like, that's it for my new character. That's it for my cool new ship. And we did crash right into the water. I'm thinking now we're going to abandon ship, get to the escape pods. And then Bryan tells us, after plunging into the water and leveling out, the ship then begins to float safely at the top. It's a Mon Calamari ship. Of course it's going to be submersible. Which was something that I never once thought about.
Oh, the adventure journals did. Don't you worry.
But if my rules hadn't led us to crash it, never would have thought about it being able to go into water, never would have used it as such.
Unfortunately, every other Star Wars game after that, I wonder if this ship is submersible. Nope. Okay, how about this one? No. Okay, how about this one?
It can go through the vacuum of space, but 20 feet underwater, nope, death trap.
That crashed and sank to the
Just
swamp.
Moncals and X-Wings.
Yeah. There's also a gradient of success and failure in Doctor Who's, the Cubicle 7 Doctor Who game. And it just has a wonderful spectrum of success and failure. It does have difficulty levels for, yes, you succeeded. And that's all that happens is you succeed. They also have, no, you failed, and that's all that happens, but you just fail. But they also have all of this spectrum of, yes, you succeeded, and like you rolled so high over the difficulty that yes, and like you get an extra bonus thing that happens that benefits the scene in your favor. They also have like, yes, but like you succeeded, but there's also something else that went better for the bad guys, even though you succeeded in what you were doing. And they also have no and, as in like, yeah, you failed and this thing happened. Or no, you didn't succeed, but this good thing happens instead. Like maybe you're trying to disarm a bomb and you roll a no, but. So no, you didn't succeed, but perhaps instead of disarming the bomb, you managed to phase shift the graviton chronometer. And so now the countdown timer is running slower. So I think that that's a wonderful spectrum of success and failure. It's sometimes taxing on the GM, but it certainly makes for more interesting scenes.
Yeah, Primetime Adventures is similar. It doesn't actually have the straight pass fail. It's always a yes and, no but, yes but, whatever. So the protagonist in Primetime Adventures, you draw cards, and if the protagonist, that is the PC, has a hand of cards that beats the producer, that is the GM, they win their stakes in the scene, whatever the character is after they get. But the player with the highest card, whether that's the protagonist or the producer, gets narrative authority on how it plays out. So if the producers, you may succeed, but if the producer's got the high card, then yeah, you win, but there's a complication. If the producer wins, but you've got the high card, you don't get your stakes, but there's some kind of silver lining in the scene. And it might play out that you win your stakes, but some player that's not even in the scene gets the high card. And that can be really entertaining when they decide to cause complications. I don't remember off the top of my head any examples of this, but I know it's come up in the past where another player just really messed with what was happening in a scene that they weren't even in. I know it was in my Circuit Breakers game, but I can't remember exactly what happened.
And as I mentioned earlier, with Monster of the Week, which is a Powered by the Apocalypse system, they forego the usual success-fail results in favor of a more narrative style, which I've really enjoyed playing and enjoyed listening to. You roll 2d6s along with your bonus for whatever it is, whatever action you are trying to accomplish. And it can be a failure, a mixed success, or a success. And high enough success means that you can choose various options and often dictating the next actions. A mid-level roll, it can be a partial success, but with imperfect results. And a failure can be anything from personal harm to ongoing negative effects. And many times it can be the player themselves deciding how those play out, which, as we've stated, it gives players the opportunity to be creative. It gives them some say in how the game progresses and lets them exercise their creative minds to further enhance the story.
Yeah, Powered by the Apocalypse games can be kind of challenging for people who are experienced gamers, I find, because you're looking at your character sheet wondering, what can I do? And they're really set up. There's no what can I do on the character sheet. It's no, you do it. And if you happen to have a trait that helps you do it, then you can roll. But for people who are just looking at their sheet, wondering what their capabilities are, Powered by the Apocalypse can get uncomfortable.
Yeah, it does eschew the traditional ways of playing for many characters where here's your stats to do this, roll this number of D6s, and there you go. I like it because I am a narrative style storyteller. So for me personally, I understand it and I enjoy it, but it's not for everyone.
But I like the way it moves a lot of the onus of narration and what happens, success or failure, from the GM to the player. So the GM doesn't have to always be on and coming up with creative things that happen all the time.
Yep.
You can move that to the player and it takes a lot of the load off.
When you and I were in a Monster of the Week campaign with a lovely GM named Ember, I had a character who had a very large gun, and I thought it would be a great idea to climb up into a tree to shoot this large gun at some vampire person, I believe, or a witch. And I rolled and I failed. So I missed, but it was the type of failure that not only did I miss, I was going to take some harm. And it was left up to me to determine how that happened. I decided, I'm an elderly gentleman climbing up in a tree to shoot a 50 caliber rifle. So this time we're going to follow the laws of physics in that every action has an equal and opposite reaction. Meaning, when I fired this large gun, the bullet went one way and my body went the other. And I flew right off of the limb and hit the ground hard.
I think that a lot of these suggestions work well, or probably work best, when you have a group of people who are all willing to take one for the team to create an interesting story. I've never had to deal with quite these levels of complications when I'm working with a munchkin or a power gamer. So I imagine that we're going to have to take some modifications when you let people pick their own failure or pick their narrative course, because we're always going to have that one person who said, yes, I know I wanted consequences for my actions, but I actually don't want consequences for my actions.
Right.
At least it's been a while since I've had to GM that particular kind of individual. So all of this assumes a certain baseline of trust, understanding, and willing to put some play in your play, as opposed to just power fantasy.
Yeah, I haven't had that experience of, okay, that sounded like a consequence, but you came out better on the other side of it than you started. So,
I mean, unless the system that you're playing is built for it. And
Right.
Fiasco actually does that. It's not exactly an RPG. It's actually not an RPG either, because it's almost all role play and very little in dice mechanics. But they do have it set up so that you can systematically, over 2 acts, fail so much that you actually succeed. And I was playing a Fiasco game where at every turn I wound up getting failure after failure after failure. Like, I was always the butt of every joke. I was always at the bottom of the heap at every scene. And in the end, and everybody is sitting there in jail after our shenanigans. And we said, well, wait a minute. I failed so hard I succeeded. What do we do? And I had one of the other players say, oh, we're all in jail, but I'll bet you're an undercover cop. So you landed us all in jail and you're getting your arrest, but you're going to be just fine because you're actually one of the cops. And I'm like, yeah, okay, I love that. Let's roll with that. And so we wound up saying that was what happened in the scene.
Fiasco is a very good example because failure is the name of the game, literally.
Mm-hmm.
I think that wraps it up for this conversation. What
I
do you guys
agree.
think?
Final words, friends. Don't be afraid to fail.
A wise man once said, we must never stop failing, because the minute we do, we've failed.
And on those wise words from Edgen, we'll head to the zombie apocalypse plan of the week. Mike, how are we hopefully succeed, not fail, in holding off the zombie hordes?
Oh, this one is just absolutely no way anything could possibly go wrong. We're just going to have to develop a 40-foot electrified perimeter fence and just fill it with 60 gajillion volts. Now, I don't know what cooked zombies smells like, but maybe this wasn't a good idea to begin with.
I've had Scottish food, so I can't imagine it being much worse than that.
I mean, and
Have you smelled haggis? I have.
I have not. And I know that you're concerned that maybe the power grid might not continue to function as it did before. I mean, even during summers in Los Angeles or Texas or really anywhere, really. But that's okay because we hooked the thing up to a generator on a bike. So long as you can keep pedaling, you'll be fine. 60
That's a
kajillion
lot
volts,
of
folks. It's
pedaling
not.
for
It's
60 gajillion volts.
it is
And the
not that
person-
hard.
The person pedaling is the one who rolled the lowest. And with that, we'll wrap it up this episode. We want to thank you all for listening in. Make sure you check us out online at all the usual places at geekatarms.com, at facebook.com/geekatarms. Mike, what's our Twitter?
We are Arms Geek on Twitter, and we are Geek at Arms on Blue Sky and Instagram.
Give us a like, leave us a review for the podcast. It really does help us out. And as always, from Bryan, Mike, and James, be safe, be blessed, and be geeky.
Thanks for listening to Geek at Arms. Music for this podcast was provided by Incompetech.com. For more, check us out at Facebook.com/Geek at Arms. Give us a like and maybe even subscribe to us on iTunes. That would be awesome.